Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my MSI play-ins day number 5 overview and analysis video. It's the final, I guess, play-ins day number whatever video that I'm going to be making, because after today we are going to be seeing the two teams that are going to be facing off tomorrow in that last chance qualifier, our first best of 5 series at MSI, to see the final team making it out of play-ins. Who's going to get the opportunity to play in that series out of the 4 teams here today? That's what we are going to find out. Of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think is going to happen. Who do you think is going to win out of Group A, and who do you think is going to win out of Group B? And then obviously, of course, let me know down below who you think is going to be winning that last chance qualifier. I'm interested to hear you guys' thoughts on, where I should be looking for advantages and disadvantages. But if you want to know my thoughts on just all of these teams as a whole, if you want to know my thoughts on how MSI has progressed up until this point so far, you can go ahead and check out the MSI playlist. That's going to be linked up in the iCard right now. That's going to have every single day covered. Every single game that's happened at the tournament so far is going to be in there, as well as my primer and my meta report. And so if you want to know my thoughts on every single team and every single game, that's the playlist to definitely check out. And I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen it, you go watch it after, of course, watching this video. But today we're going to be covering the basically final games of the main groups, the final best of 3s in play-ins, and that means there's a lot on the line. 2 teams again will be eliminated from MSI here today, so definitely don't want to be losing. But let's go ahead and kick it right off. Of course, if you're new to the channel, what we do here is we go game by game in each series, talking about the strengths and the weaknesses that each team was able to employ. I'll give my player of the game and my dud of the game, and then at the end, I'll kind of give my thoughts on the upcoming series, talking about who I think I would favor and why, maybe matchup-wise, it could be interesting. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the analysis. We're going to be kicking it off, of course, with the first series of the day, which was Group A. It was a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LCS in Golden Guardians and the number 1 seed from the LLA in Movistar R7. Definitely an intriguing matchup. We always love to see LCS versus LLA, kind of neighboring rivals there, North America and Latin America. Very, very cool to see R7 get to this point, being able to take down GAM yesterday. A pretty big upset. This is a region that has never won an international best of series up until this point, but they were able to break that streak up against the VCS yesterday, which was really, really fun. And then Golden Guardians on the other side has looked pretty fantastic over the course of the tournament so far, better than pretty much anybody, maybe with the exception of me, could have predicted. They've looked really, really good. They absolutely destroyed GAM, and then they really did hold their own against BLG, who was able to get out of the group in first place. But this is going to be an intriguing matchup. I think a lot of people are favoring Golden Guardians, and I absolutely would agree. I think that Golden Guardians should definitely not struggle in this matchup, especially when you look at, where they have their advantages. Licorice should be the better top laner. River should be the better jungler. Gory should be the better mid laner. 6A and Huki should be the better bot laner. But, R7's a team that has already shown that they're not afraid to play above their skill level, and they're not afraid to kind of win in ways that I think other teams aren't as used to playing against, from behind. And that's something that Golden Guardians does pretty poorly, is playing from behind. And so if R7 can get that early lead, if they can, maybe capitalize on some of these early plays, that could be an avenue to victory. But Golden Guardians has a really good early game. That's kind of what they're known for back in the LCS. And so I would definitely say that Golden Guardians has the upper hand in terms of style and in terms of talent. But obviously, no game is said and done before it's ever played, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Of course, we're going game by game, and that means starting off with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take the first game of the series here. They're able to go up 1-0. Obviously, in a best of 3, that's a massive game, because you do not want to go down 0-1. You don't want to have to win both of the final 2 games in a row. Not that that's impossible, but you certainly don't want to have to do that after just one game. And Golden Guardians definitely taking the momentum lead, which is also really big for both of these teams. We already know Movistar has been having some really good momentum spikes, in the recent, games yesterday, and Golden Guardians, I think, a team that notoriously kind of thrives off of having momentum. It's good to see them get that in game number 1, and quite frankly, this was an absolute stomp. I even think that the stats don't quite tell you how dominant this was, and the stats look dominant. That's kind of how good it was for Golden Guardians. This wasn't a particularly close game, but credit to them, they got their early lead, and then they never looked back, and that's kind of what you want to see out of a major region versus a minor region. But what ended up happening in this game? Well, Golden Guardians do take control of the early game almost exclusively going through the mid lane to get it done. River with a really nice gank at, I think, level 3 to be able to pick off Mireyu on the Lissandra, and then a really nice repeat gank a little bit later. A perfect CC chain coming out from the Vi coming in and locking down the Lissandra, and then immediately into the charm. Mireyu really didn't have any way of outplaying that, and he just goes down again, and so a lot of gold generated immediately, basically, through the mid lane, but that's not the only place. Adi does try to pull some stuff back. It does not quite work out, which is pretty disastrous, and then River starts to appear in the top lane to make Bong's life a lot more difficult as well, and so just generally, Golden Guardians kind of running the map in the early game, and this is what they've been really good at for a while. Even in the LCS, when you were looking at their series against both Cloud9 and FlyQuest, you know, the wins that they were able to take off of those teams, most of them were because they were able to generate such a strong lead in the early game that they were just able to close it out, and I think that's kind of the strategy that Golden Guardians definitely want to keep going to, and, you know, have that, you know, scaling insurance with Stixxay in the bot lane, and we'll get to him in a bit because he played the rest of this game really well, but the mid game was just more control from Golden Guardians. It's just them saying, we're the better team, we're up 5k gold at like 11 minutes into this game, we're just going to run the map. They're getting every single objective, they are pushing it down mid and getting everything. They basically got mid-tier 1 and mid-tier 2 for free, which is never a good sign on the other side, even without the Herald, but they did use the Herald relatively well both times in this game. Just a lot of control. Again, there's really not a lot that R7 can do on the map because they can never go up and fight them, and Golden Guardians is doing a good job to make sure that they're not separated. It allows Licorice and Stixxay to get really far ahead, or to continue, I guess, to scale up where River and Gory had already gotten their gold in the early game, and so basically everybody on the side of Golden Guardians is going to be difficult to deal with, especially if they're grouped together, which is definitely their strategy for this game. And then we get into some of the late game team fights, and that's really where things just become like unwinnable. Mainly the Baron fight. You know, this was just not good from R7. It looked like it wasn't actually going to be all that bad. River dives all the way in and ends up getting blown up, only trading 1 for 1, but Stixxay can't get over the wall. He can't actually deal his damage. Eventually, he just walks around and walks up to the fight and ends up getting like a triple or a quadra kill out of one of the two, I don't remember, and just absolutely dominating it. They get the Baron for free. They just run it down bot. And then there's a really good engage from Bong. He actually lands the Malphite ultimate on top of the Aphelios, but some great disengage coming out from Golden Guardians, and quite frankly, their gold lead is just way too much at this point to be able to fight. The Malphite gets blown up instantly. There's no follow-up, and Stixxay is able to dominate the fight alongside Licorice, and so good stuff overall from Golden Guardians. Basically everything you wanted to see out of them coming from game number 1. Stixxay is gonna get my player of the game because he was the one that was kind of dominating the late game team fights, but I think this was more of a team effort than it was one individual player dominating. That's what you get in a 25-minute stomp. It's not one lane that just kind of wins the game for your team when you stomp this hard. It's every single lane winning, and that's what Golden Guardians had in this game. River was fantastic in the early game. Gory did a great job following up on it. You know, considering he's more of a secondary carry, Gory legitimately might be one of the better secondary carries in the entire world right now. Not a lot of mid laners are kind of taking on that role in 2023. I think Gory has done that at a super high level, willing to give up resources to play for the rest of his team, and I think he does that almost better than anybody, especially in North America. But like I said before, the side laners really stepping up towards the back half of the game. Stixxay and Huki are just such a dominant duo. Stixxay flashing into enemy teams as the Aphelios and just pressing Q on the red gun is always going to be at least a little bit scary. And, you know, he's not afraid to go and make plays. You pair that with Huki, who's also not afraid. Licorice, who knows how to peel and knows how to follow up and is in the best form that he has been in 2023. It's just a recipe for Golden Guardians to dominate a team like R7 that just doesn't have the talent to compete. But for R7, it's a sucky game number 1, but you gotta keep your head on straight. Mireyu is gonna get my dud of the game, but again, realistically, this could go to everybody. Like, nobody won in this game. Everybody kind of lost. Mireyu was just probably the most visible in terms of how he lost because of the early ganks. I've been a little bit disappointed with him. I was hyping him up a lot going into this tournament, and yes, R7 is winning, but it's not often been through mid lane. It really hasn't been, you know, the take that I thought it would be when it came to Movistar R7. It's probably the only team whose preview that I didn't get like 100% spot on. I still think that there were a lot of things on this team that I did get right, but unfortunately Mireyu was not one of them. Being high on him has not necessarily paid off internationally, but Bong had a much worse game, and that's going to be a problem. He was big in that series against Gam. Audi could not get anything done in the early game, which was also a big kind of turning point. Seo and Lions, just not much they can do. Lions actually had some interesting plays, like, and not a bad game at all from him. He tried his best, but there's only so much you can do on Rakan, and then Seo was never really going to be able to team fight here on the Zeri so long as Golden Guardians actually knew what they were doing, and so definitely a stomp in game 1, but a lot of opportunities for R7 to bounce back. Again, it's just the first game, but they got to be able to bounce back, or else they're going to be out pretty quickly here after that miraculous win, and for Golden Guardians, I think that's what they want. They want to try and take this relatively easily. They don't want a tough day here today. They want to be able to get by R7 in pretty clean fashion, and game 1 was definitely a path towards that. And so are they going to be able to do the same in game number 2, or is R7 going to bounce back and show that that upset in that first round is not exactly an upset after all? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to take the series in a really clean 2-0 sweep. And quite frankly, they're able to show that there is no fluke here. This is not an accidental team that was just barely able to take a game off of Billy. No, they are one of the best teams at this tournament, or at least one of the top 8 teams at this tournament. They deserve to be here. And all that hype around, oh, it would have been better if we sent FlyQuest, or oh, NA's a minor region, they only should have sent one team. Like, that's all disappeared at this point because they are so clearly better than the middle grouping of teams here at MSI, and I'm really happy to say that. But let's go ahead and talk about what happened in this game, because you can see game number 1, 25 minutes, game number 2, 23 minutes, even shorter. And so another really, really solid win for Golden Guardians, just kind of showing that, quite frankly, R7 was not on their level, was not really able to compete at all with them. And so what ended up happening in the game? Well, Golden Guardians are able to generate another pretty massive lead in the early game. Instead of it being mid lane this time, it's in the side lanes. And quite frankly, both of them are just kind of the laners. It's not even really River taking over the game. Now, River does, spend some resources in the top side on that Nocturne, trying to get that fear onto the Malphite to make his escape a lot less predictable. But, Stixxay and Huki, they were able to generate their own lead all by themselves. Playing that Lucianami, wanting to be able to have that pressure in the early game, wanting to be able to win that 2v2 by themselves. And oh boy, did they win that 2v2 by themselves. Not only were they up a ridiculous amount of CS, they were also just dominating. They end up getting a 2v2 kill. Really good flash by Stixxay to be able to pick off, I believe it was Sayo, it could have been Lions, it was one of the two, and then they just follow up to get the other. Really nice double kill early on, and then, like I talked about earlier, Bong just overextending in the top lane, Licorice punishing, both him and River flashing over the wall to be able to pick him up, and then it's just like, oh, well, I guess the game's kind of over. Golden Guardians have another pretty massive lead, and it doesn't feel like R7 has the team fighting capability to be able to bring a game like this back, especially when Audie's not having a particularly good game in the jungle. They do get one back, catching an overextended 6A in the bot lane, because that's really where you're going to find a lot of advantages against a team like Golden Guardians, is Stixxay and Huki are pretty much always going to be pushed up, and you can, take advantage of that in certain circumstances, but outside of that, really not a lot of plays happening in the early game for R7. Now, I will say, it was a much more active mid-game from them. They actually do try and fight back in certain circumstances. Licorice ends up getting a solo kill on Bong in the top lane in the mid-game, but R7 see that as an opportunity to perhaps try and take a 4v4 in the bot river, and they actually don't do too bad for themselves in it. I believe it's a 1-for-1. It could have been a 2-for-2 as well, though. Something that went relatively even, and it's like, okay, well, R7's at least able to fight, and they continue to play relatively aggressive, but it was the fight at around 15 minutes that really doomed their entire game, where they end up losing 3-for-0. They get Stixxay a ridiculous amount of gold, not that he didn't already have a lot of gold on the Lucian, and from that point onwards, I just don't really see a lot of ways for them to be able to stop this. The late game team fights are all in favor of Golden Guardians. They dominate the entire map. They execute this top lane dive under tier 2 basically to perfection, with Gory blocking off everybody with the wall, Licorice not being able to die, and Stixxay playing really aggro on the Lucian and getting all the peel that he needs. It was basically perfectly executed, and from that point onwards, they're literally just running it down. Like, they're running it into the base with Baron buff, and they're just standing there for like a minute and a half. This is low elo solo queue stuff, but they're strong enough to be able to pull that off. They end up being able to close out the game from there, and it's just dominant. Like, there really is no other word to express what ended up happening in this series. They dominated R7. It really is as simple as that. Player of the game for me is actually going to go to Gory. I know a lot of people are going to want to give this to Licorice, and I totally understand. Licorice was awesome. He ended up getting that solo kill in the top lane. River did help out with a couple other ones, but he was unkillable this entire game. Like, there was absolutely nothing that R7 could do to even remotely try and stop Licorice. He was just so dominant, but I feel like Gory is kind of getting underrated for how good of a Taliyah performance this is. I've been very critical of this champion as a whole. I don't think she's performed all that well in Spring. I don't think she's performed all that well at MSI up until this point, and Gory just made it look like it was the most busted champion on the entire planet. His ultimates were phenomenal. The damage that he was putting out was great. He solo killed a Maokai, for God's sake. Like, I mean, just crazy stuff coming out from the Taliyah. A really good game from him, and again, I can't stress this enough. This is a player that has consistently been underrated by basically every analyst worldwide. I have seen nobody talking about him as somebody who is, on the same level as, like, Niski or even, Eminus, on Cloud9, right? Like, he's right there with all of them. He is an upper tier mid laner, and he is a big reason why this team has been so consistent, is because he doesn't really lose at this level, basically no matter who he's going against. He had a really good series going up against a player like Yagao that I think a lot of people just assume was a better version of him, and, you know, I think Gory is really proving that he deserves a lot of respect at this level. Another really good game. But yes, Licorice was really good. 6A and Huki continued to be dominant. Huki, in particular, had another really good game, and then River was everywhere he needed to be. The Nocturne was a lot of fun, so Golden Guardians just taking every single advantage they have and continuing to push it. As for R7 on the other side, they're just not good enough to play at this level, and I hate to say that, but, you know, that upset over GAM was great. Golden Guardians is a different beast. They are a different type of beast to have to go into, and unfortunately, they just weren't good enough to be able to hold up to that kind of challenge. Bong is going to get my dead of the game. Miserable game on the Malphite. Absolutely no pressure on the top side, and really not a lot that he could do. Mireyu, I don't even think I remember him being in this game. I can't tell you a single thing that he did or did not do. Maybe he did some damage, but I didn't see it. Like, I totally forgot there was a Jace in this game. Sayo and Lions lost so hard in the early 2v2 that even when they were able to make some plays in the mid game, Lions in particular, there just wasn't a lot of coming back. And then Audi got solo killed by Gory. He had a pretty miserable game in and of itself. And so R7, like I said, just not able to hold up at this level. And that's okay. You were able to win your first ever international best of series, which is a massive accomplishment. Just because you weren't able to go a lot further than that doesn't mean you can't look back at MSI as a positive. And I think that's what I would take away if I was an LLA fan. You got here in the first place, and that's pretty fantastic. You got to the point where you were one series away from a last chance qualifier to get out of the play-ins. That's pretty darn good, if I say so myself. You weren't one of the two worst teams at this tournament. You were better than the VCS, you were better than the LJL, and that's a big one. So even if you weren't able to compete with the LCS in this game, I do think that there are positives to take away. But, you know, congrats to Golden Guardians. They now move on to face the winner of the series that we're going to talk about right now in the video. And, you know, quite frankly, if they're playing like they played in this series, I don't think anybody coming out of that side of the bracket is going to hold a chance. And then moving on to our second series of the day here, and this is the one I was really looking forward to. On paper, I think both of these teams are actually pretty interesting, definitely favoring one over the other, but I don't think it's by nearly as much as some other people would tell you. We have a matchup between the number 1 seed from the PCS in PSG Talon and the number 1 seed from the CB LOL in Loud. Really, really excited to see this. I like both of these teams quite a bit, which you will know if you've watched the other MSI videos. PSG, one of the teams that I actually favored to get out of play-ins. Obviously, my opinion on that has changed just a tad bit with how good Golden Guardians has been, but PSG was originally my pick for the third team to make it out of play-ins. I really like how they play the mid to late game. They are awesome, arguably the single best team in play-ins from behind. They never really give up a lot of games. Their early game's not bad. They can play a little slow, but their macro's solid, and they're really smart about when and why to engage a lot of these fights. Loud, very much the opposite, a very aggressive team that very much thrives off of being able to outplay their opponents. They've got incredibly talented players like Rout and Seos, who I think are some of the best players in their roles in play-ins, and then Robo, who had a really good split in the CB LOL and very much impacted a lot of games for them, even if he was a little bit feast or famine. I don't think Croc and Tinones are pushovers either. I like both of these teams a lot. I did end up picking PSG Talon to win this because for as good as Loud is, I do think PSG is just a tad bit more consistent, and I do think that they have a little bit more upside, but I really want to see this series go to 3 games. I really think I want to see both of these teams be able to pick up at least one win and show that my faith in them was certainly at least a little bit well warranted. You know, obviously them getting to this place, to this point in the first place is, you know, good enough in most occasions, but I'd love to see both of these teams really step up here today. But who's going to be able to take it? Well, we're going to find out at least starting in game number 1 here. And the winner of game number 1 was PSG. They are able to take the first game of the series, obviously a very important one, and this was just such a classic PSG game. Loud, you know, trying to be aggressive, trying to make plays in the early game, and getting punished for their over-aggression, not only in the early game, but in the late game. PSG knowing exactly the advantages that they're able to take, the advantages that they're able to capitalize on, and where they can make those positive plays work. And honestly, you just got to give them a lot of credit. Their macro is so good, especially compared to pretty much every other quote-unquote minor region team. They're so much more cohesive and coherent in the mid to late game. They know exactly where they need to be as a group, and they execute on it, and that was definitely the case here in game number 1. But what exactly happened? How did we get to the point where PSG was able to take this in 33 minutes? Well, PSG did gain quite a bit of advantages in the early game, most of them coming top lane. You'll notice a pretty intricate draft here from Loud. The Rise top is very intriguing. You're going to need a lot to be able to make that work. It's an interesting pick into something like the Kennen as a counter. I don't hate it inherently, I do think that Ryze can do relatively well into Kennen in the top lane 1v1. The big problem there is, Robo as a player is someone who attracts a lot of jungle attention. He did in the CB LoL, and man, has he so far at MSI. A lot of teams have seen him as someone who is not really willing to play safe and definitely is going to be overextended at points. And so if you do invest jungle attention, it's likely going to pay itself off. And that was absolutely the case here in game number 1 as well. And on a champion like Ryze that doesn't have any inherent mobility outside of his ultimate, it's just not very good. Like, there's not a lot of opportunities for you to be able to escape situations where you're caught out, and PSG knew that. Junjie was going top lane, Yubao was going top lane a lot, and they were 3-manning Robo and getting a lot of advantages off of that, and, that was really the kind of core of being able to establish PSG's lead. Now, they did end up getting a couple of nice fights mid lane as well. Yubao on this Tristana was really a big deal in the early game and was really dealing, I would say, a lot for PSG, but Junjie also basically everywhere that he needed to be. Aji capitalizing on a lot of the mistakes that Robo was making. PSG was just able to generate a pretty solid lead. Now, credit to Loud, they stayed fighting in the mid game. This is a team that is not going to give up. We saw that in the G2 series at the beginning of the tournament. They're not going to just roll over and die. They're going to continue to try and stay in games, and they absolutely did that in this one, or at least they tried. They made some interesting one-for-ones. They were catching Wacko out in the bot lane. Good stuff, trying to actively make plays. The problem was that anytime that there was any sort of neutral fight, or anytime like one small mistake would go wrong, like Loud had absolutely no way to fight back because the gold deficit was just simply too massive at that point, and that's exactly what happened. The macro play was just simply better for PSG, and we just saw more catches. Yubao ends up killing Robo consistently under tower, which at that point the Ryze pick is just completely and utterly useless. He's never going to scale up into the late game, and then, even with Yubao getting caught by Croc, which was a really good, play for Loud in the bot lane, and, shout out to Croc, I thought he played relatively well. They just weren't able to capitalize on some of the other plays. They end up diving way too deep to try and get Wacko. In the mid lane, he ends up surviving some really good peel from Woody, and he's able to destroy the fight to really crack open the game for PSG. And then eventually, they're able to get Baron. Loud attempt to try and contest Soul point, I guess you should say, for PSG, and then, PSG's go, screw it. Like, if they're going to try and commit and try and take Soul from us, we're just going to turn. We don't care about the dragon. If we kill them, we can end the game, and that's exactly what they do. They're able to pick off 2 in that fight, and then they're able to push down the base and get the rest to be able to end. So good game overall from PSG, again, just showing off their good decision-making, especially in the mid to late game. They were exactly where they needed to be, basically at every moment. And I continue to really like this team as a unit. I think Junjie is going to get my player of the game here on the set 20. He was involved in basically everything that this team did over the course of the game, but I also kind of really want to give a big shout out to Yubao. He was a player that I was really pointing out on the side of PSG as kind of the player I was most looking forward to seeing at this tournament. I'd never really been like ridiculously high on Uniboy as a player in international events before, but I think this is his best year so far, at least the tape that I watched of him in the PCS. This is the most impressive that I've ever seen him, and I think that form is definitely carried over to MSI here. I think he's probably the best player on this team, and I think he showed that some really aggressive plays on the Tristana, but followed up really well with Junjie on the Sejuani. I mean, the Sedge was just everywhere on the map, creating plays, baiting Loud into trying to make plays, most specifically Croc, who was just way too aggressive and trying to stop this Sejuani, and, really made a lot of errors. Aji was good on the Kennen, some good ultimates. Wacko, really good at surviving in the late game. Obviously that fight was massive. Outside of that, he was just okay, and then Woody was good on the Thresh. Really not a lot of need for him in this game, but for PSG, just generally, like, this was a team effort, and this is exactly what you want to see. Mid-jungle, really having a good game, and the rest of the team being able to capitalize on it. And then for Loud on the other side, I honestly don't think a lot of their players played all that bad. The one player that I think had a pretty miserable game is going to be Robo in the top lane, and this is going to be the issue with Loud. Like I said earlier, he's a very feast or famine player. He even was that in the CB LoL. He does not know how to play safe. He does not know how to not push forward in lane, especially when he has a winning matchup like he did in this game, and it's very much come to cost them, not only in this series, but it cost them against G2, and it was a little bit worrying against DFM as well, where it feels really consistent that if you put jungle attention or even mid lane attention into Robo in the early game, that you're going to be able to get something out of it, because he's not going to be able to counter that on a low mobility champion, and that is exactly what happened this game. I'm not going to say he single-handedly lost in the early game, but he certainly didn't help. Croc was really good, I would say, in the mid game. Unfortunately, his late game shenanigans were pretty bad and ended up being a problem. And then Tinones, Route, Seos, they didn't have a lot of like positive plays in this game, but they didn't really have a lot of negative plays. It was just kind of Loud waiting for their opportunity and not really ever having it come to them. And so overall, Loud definitely still has a chance to stay in this series, but PSG with a really dominating first win. I think even in 33 minutes, this was a pretty dominating win, definitely more reminiscent of the stomps that we saw in series number 1 than it would be some of the close games that we saw, in the previous rounds. And so Definitely would favor PSG going into game number 2 with momentum, but Loud's one of those teams where if they get that early game rolling, if Robo can be a little bit more consistent, it's not like the rest of the team played all that bad. They definitely have an opportunity, and so are they going to be able to capitalize in game 2, or is their MSI going to be over just as quickly as it was getting started? Well, the winner of game number 2 was PSG. They are able to take game number 2. They were able to close out the day in 4 games, 2-2-0 sweeps. And I was really looking forward to kind of an interesting series here, and unfortunately, PSG said, nope, we're good, we're just going to win, we're going to move on to face Golden Guardians, and we're not going to worry about it too much, and that's kind of what we got here. I do think that this series was much closer, you know, if you really want to compare it to the Golden Guardians series versus R7, but still, PSG was absolutely the better of these two teams, and they showed that off across both of these games. Another pretty similar story. Draft was very, very, very important in this game, and I don't usually say that, but when Loud drafts this big burst combo kind of comp where you've got the Annie, you've got the Malphite, you've even got a Viego, right, where you just want to get in on one person, shut them down, and then you can continue to move forward with the Zeri. But you're going against a Kindred, like, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. Even the Galio, the Cassante, there really aren't a lot of targets on the enemy team to be able to blow up really quickly unless you get on that Kindred without that ultimate, or perhaps get on the Aphelios somehow, even with Thresh Lantern. Like, there just aren't a lot of options for Loud to be able to win a lot of these fights if PSG is ahead, especially, and that kind of absolutely came to fruition towards the back half of the game. But credit to PSG, they knew their win condition and they played to it well. Wasn't the most dominant of games of all time, just a really slow, smooth closeout win for PSG. Again, very similar to the types of wins that they were getting all year long in the PCS. So what ended up happening? Well, PSG get another pretty solid early game, this time off of a bunch of dives, not only top lane, but also bot lane. They do get first blood in the top lane onto the Malphite with the 3-man dive there. They send 4 men to the bot lane to get another dive off, but Rout actually does a good job turning this 1-for-1, or I actually think it ends up being a 2-for-1 with Rout dying as well. But we'll talk about Rout. He actually played this game pretty well, and he was definitely the saving grace of Loud over the course of the series just in general, but PSG definitely generating a lead off of some of these early game plays. They also get a nice fight in bot river that kind of gives them a little bit of gold, and you know, just overall, I would say, are definitely the team that jumps out to early control over the map, which I think is the most important thing when it comes to how the early game ends up playing out. But credit to Loud, very similar to game number 1. They stay active in the mid game. They aren't giving up, but I would argue that the plays that they made here in game number 2 were just better, and they were more successful than any of the plays that they made in game number 1. Really, the big one is Rout popping off in this bot lane fight that really kept Loud in the game. It looked like a really good engage for PSG Talon, and Rout and Seos in particular were just doing as much as they absolutely could. The Zeri was absolutely trying to take over this fight, and it ends up being a team fight win for Loud, which was really good. It kept them in this game. It didn't put them in a dominating position or anything, but definitely put Loud in a position where they could actually play out the game because they had a super fed Zeri, and they do have Peel on this team. Like, if you need to play the Protect the Zeri comp, you have options to be able to do so. You don't need to full engage with Annie ultimate and Malphite ultimate. You can also use those for Peel. You know, you can use, you know, not Tibbers, but maybe Annie stun for Peel. You've got a Nautilus, you've got a Viego, you've got ways to keep the Zeri alive. And so it's not the worst situation in the world for Loud. Unfortunately, PSG almost immediately take full control at the Baron fight. They play this unbelievably well. A very slow fight. It ends up trickling down into the bot river. That's how long it ends up taking, but just really slow, really controlled, really good fighting from PSG, where they're able to get 4-for-0, and they're able to get the Baron. They're able to retake control of the game, and that brings us to the Soul fight, which is just another win for PSG. And from that point, the game is just over. Like, there really isn't a lot. PSG now has Baron, and they have Mountain Soul. They know that they can just split it down. They can send one person top lane. They can send everybody else mid lane. They can get all the inhibitors. They can get all the Nexus turrets, they can get all the enemy champions, and they can end up getting the game. Really good stuff from PSG. Again, just a really controlled, really, you know, just good victory. Really not a lot of negatives to give out to this team. They weren't perfect in the mid game. They were able to give over some things to Loud, but I think a lot of that was just Loud team fighting really well, and Rout in particular just having really good positioning. But every opportunity that PSG had to play their style and to play their game, they took, and they were able to execute on at a high level. My player of the game is going to go to Junjia on this Kindred. He continues to be really good. He's also going to get my player of the series here for PSG. He was just phenomenal across both of these games. Him and Yubao have such a good chemistry together that I really like the Kindred Galio duo, even though typically I would say that Junjia definitely more of the supportive jungler, Yubao much more of the carry-oriented mid. They definitely have shown that they can do the opposite as well, and just the synergy that they play together with, I think, is really positive and really good overall, and that's a big reason why they're moving on. Aji had a really good series. He was way better than Robo. They spent a lot of time, PSG that is, in the top lane, trying to get Robo behind, trying to get Aji ahead, and I think it absolutely did work. another really good Cassante game. What a big shock. We've seen a couple of those. Wacko and Woody look really good scoreline-wise. They weren't exactly the most dominant players, but Wacko's positioning is still really aggro and can definitely still get you a lot of advantages, and Woody was good on the Thresh as well. It was just a solid game from PSG. They continue to be a unit that pushes themselves forward rather than a couple of individual players kind of carrying some more lackluster ones. I think, especially compared to a lot of the other play-in teams, they're one of the most complete teams in the entire play-in stage, and I think that was definitely shown off in this series. But for Loud, tough way to go out of the tournament. You definitely wanted to see them fight a little bit here, but unfortunately they just weren't good enough to be able to compete with PSG, and it's not entirely surprising. I had them in my bottom 3 teams for a reason, even if I did have them at the top of that group, and, you know, luckily that's kind of paid off. I think that they were probably better than R7. They definitely were better than DFM with how they beat them, but Robo was just a little bit too big of an issue in this series, quite frankly. He's going to get another dud of the game. He wasn't quite as bad here in game number 2 as he was in game number 1, but he just had no pressure the entirety of the series. In fact, he had negative pressure. He was kind of taking away from the opportunities that Loud was able to have over the course of the game, and that wasn't very good. Credit to Route. Even Seos, I know Seos' like scoreline looks miserable, but he was doing a lot of peeling for Route this game, and he ended up dying for it, but Route was really able to keep this game alive in a lot of different circumstances, and Croc and Tinones just aren't the carry players that you need to be able to win these games. Route can step up, and if Robo can step up, they would have had a shot in this series, but unfortunately only one of them was just not going to be enough, and that means their MSI tournament is over. I still think this is an okay result for Loud, basically exactly where I expected them to be. Maybe they wanted to get to that last chance qualifier. That probably was their goal, but unfortunately PSG was just a little bit too much to be able to overcome. And then for PSG on the other side, they now move on to face Golden Guardians tomorrow. The winner of that series will be making the MSI main stage for PCS fans and for PSG fans just in general. You're really hoping that they're going to be able to not only put up a fight, but even be able to take that. I certainly don't think it's without, you know, possibility. PSG is looking like a really good team, a really controlled team, and that's the kind of team that I think can beat a more momentum-based team like Golden Guardians. And so, big win for PSG, but really the big challenge is going to come tomorrow. Alright, but that is going to do it for my MSI play-ins Day 5 overview and analysis. Golden Guardians and PSG Talon moving on in that last chance qualifier tomorrow to see who the final team to make it out of play-ins will be. Both of these teams have played really well up until this point, but really, tomorrow is going to be the make or break. One of them will be eliminated and one of them will be moving on to the main stage. I think I'm going to predict it to be Golden Guardians. I think they've been playing better as of recent, and I think talent-wise, they're just a little bit above PSG, but the consistency of PSG is incredibly good. They're a team that plays really well from behind. Golden Guardians love to get early leads, and so it's definitely a stylistic matchup, but I think I'm definitely going to have to go Golden Guardians in terms of who I'm going to pick in that one. But I want to know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Who do you think is going to take it? Who do you think is going to be the team to make it out of play-ins? Of course, let me know down there what you thought of this video as well and the 2 series that we did end up talking about. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content. Also, it helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be posting about every single day of MSI action, play-ins, main stage, everything. And so if you're interested in more MSI coverage, if you enjoyed this video, I promise you're going to enjoy the rest. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.